It's Monday morning. Freddie usually arrives around 6. His metallic blue transistor radio announces his arrival long before I hear the gate combination. He tries to be quiet, sweeping up the ficus leaves from the stone patio outside our one-bedroom apartment. Today's a big day. It's a new beginning for me. And it doesn't matter that I might not be ready. It's going to begin, with or without me. Let me explain. Actually, maybe posing it as a question will be better. If someone asked you to tell your life story in 500 words or less, could you do it? It's not a lot of words. How do you decide what to put in, or more importantly, what you're going to leave out? Where do you even begin? At the beginning, most would say. Yeah, but that's the problem. There are just so many beginnings. There's the growing up in Philly beginning, the original beginning. The Nashville beginning of 1990, which kicked off the next 20 years of my life as a songwriter and an artist. The 2012 beginning after I sold my house and nearly everything I owned and moved onto a 35-foot sailboat to write books. Marrying the love of my life in 2015. That was a great beginning. Which led to the beginning of 2019 after we sold the boat, our home for nearly a decade, and then moved to Mexico. In March of 2020, all of our beginnings were put on hold. And I guess that brings me to right here, episode 1 of this podcast, the beginning that I'm not ready to begin. Wow, I'm gonna need some coffee. Better. You see, when I was younger and full of piss and vinegar, as they used to say, this was much easier. Beginning something new or leaping headfirst into unfamiliar territory never really bothered me. I said yes to a lot of opportunities I had no business saying yes to. For example, opening solo for Robert Plant with just an acoustic guitar, and then doing the same damn thing to open Farm Aid. Naive? Reckless? Maybe so. But I felt that I'd be more disappointed with myself if I didn't attempt something out of fear than if I tried it and it simply didn't work out. But these days, it's quite the opposite. I've been overthinking a lot, especially the launch of this podcast. The name, the subject, the length, and overall tone of the show. Then when I read that there are almost 1 million active podcasts and over 48 million episodes floating around there in the universe, my overthinking kicked into overdrive. Because let's face it, there are 2 things this world doesn't need more of: lawyers and opinions. What can I add? How can I help and not simply add to the noise? Not having an answer to those questions kept me from launching this podcast for over a year. I began to see this beginning as daunting and terrifying rather than exciting and full of possibility. Daunting because the space is crowded and growing more so every day. Daunting because of the competition. This podcast, episode 1, is competing for your attention alongside podcasts that have been in existence for 20 years with hundreds, possibly thousands of episodes under their belt. For instance, NPR's Radiolab, their first episode aired in 2002. 1.8 million listeners tune in for every episode. Then you have This American Life with Ira Glass, WTF with Mark Maron, Joe Rogan. You get the point. We can always find plenty of excuses not to do something, but the comparison trap might be the most destructive one of all. The Danish philosopher, and let me just stop and say, I will rarely, if ever, quote Danish philosophers on this show, but the Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard pretty much hit the nail squarely on the head when he wrote, "The greatest impediment to creativity is measuring it against other creativity." Just imagine if every person who ever launched a creative project first created a graph or a spreadsheet measuring their effort with those that came before. Nothing would have ever been published, exhibited, or performed. Think about it. If Dylan decided that Woody Guthrie was the final authority on the human condition, there'd be no blood on the tracks. Without Velázquez, the Picasso we know today might not exist. And without the films of Federico Fellini, there may never have been a Francis Ford Coppola, no Godfather, and no Apocalypse Now. The mountain of legendary creation is unscalable, so why try? So what changed? Why step now into an oversaturated space where there's no financial benefit and most likely, at the very beginning, very little critical feedback or engagement? Well, it's been a rough 2 years. Shortly after the release of my fourth book, things basically ground to a halt, and I hit a creative wall. Now, I'm not blaming the pandemic for that wall, but being shut down and closed in for as long as we all were made it very apparent that I was getting little accomplished. I questioned everything. I questioned my writing, my effort, and at times, my sanity. This is not a place anybody wants to be, and I decided it had to stop. During the time I was mired in all that mental crap, which I'll admit was mostly self-inflicted, I thought, if I'm going through this, my friends are going through this, and people I see on social media are going through this, then maybe we can all talk our way through it together. Yeah, there are a million podcasts out there. There are a million coffee shops in the world, and nobody ever bitches about that. I know I don't. I'm just happy to have a cup of coffee when I want one. I don't ever find myself saying, man, there are just too many coffee shops, I'm not going in there. I believe the more positivity we can pump into this crazy freaking world, the better things get. So, what's the deal? What's it about? The Mind Unset is about the process. This process of life, creativity, and happiness, even when we aren't feeling the most creative or the happiest. I'm talking less about fear and more about possibilities. And I want this to be a space where people come to be inspired, supported, and encouraged to take action and change what's no longer working. If it's all working and you don't need to change a thing, great. Hang out anyway. Sometimes I'll have cool guests. Sometimes I'll be talking to myself. This is an entirely new format for me. I want it to develop and grow through the changes that I make and from input that I get from you. And here's the thing. I live and record this show in a very small town in Mexico. And while it may be small, it's pretty loud. Tamale guys drive by on mopeds, hummingbirds chirp, dogs bark, roosters, and then there's Freddie. There's likely no way to take it out of the recording. I simply have to embrace the chaos and get something done. At this point, after 30 years in the business of writing and performing, I've arrived at the notion that perfection is a myth, a unicorn. Sometimes, the end result of pushing through the imperfection is the closest we ever come to the perfection. Maybe this is all bullshit. I have no way of knowing. You see, I'm fighting this out in real time with you. Fear is real, but so is triumph, awe, and wonderment. And I'm hitting the reset button. But maybe, before we can reset, we have to unset some of the crap we've been telling ourselves for a very long time. Listen, telling any of our stories in 500 words or less might be a tall order. And starting at the beginning is way more complicated than I ever imagined. But there comes a point where you stop overthinking, stop your preparation, and simply begin the next beginning. Thanks for listening. Tune in next week for my conversation with Portland-based artist and photographer and YouTuber Dustin Klein.
And actually, in the beginning, and this is what I'll tell people when they want to start, is like, dude, no one's watching. It's really hard to get people to watch. So get over yourself. Exactly what you said. Like, once you stop focusing on it or looking at it, just life gets a lot better. I know that I'm an acquired taste, so I kind of just need to remind myself that, like, I'm not the vanilla that everyone's going to love. So therefore I'm not going to be the million billion sub person. Like, it's just, I'm too myself.
It was a great conversation. Make sure you come back for that one. If you like what you're hearing, subscribe, share it, tell your friends. The show doesn't go anywhere without you. Stop by themindunset.com or check us out on Instagram at themindunset. Until next week, be nice, do good stuff.